The first time I understood that my family had already decided my future without me. It was said casually, between a toast and a slice of roast turkey. "Emily doesn't really need to be included in that part," my mother said, lifting her wine glass as if she were commenting on the weather. She didn't look at me when she said it. Neither did my father. The table went quiet for half a second. Not long enough to be awkward, just long enough for the words to land. I was 31 years old, sitting in my parents' dining room in a large house outside of Hartford, Connecticut. Thanksgiving dinner, my sister's kids running in and out of the room, my brother already on his second drink. And in that moment, I realized something had already been taken from me. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. I smiled. Reflex. The kind of smile you learn when you grow up being the reasonable one. "It's fine," I said. "I get it." What I got was this. They had been planning something for a long time, and I was no longer part of it. My name is Emily Caldwell. I'm the middle child, the one people describe as dependable, thoughtful, easy, the one who doesn't cause trouble. For most of my life, that description felt like praise. That night, it finally sounded like a warning. My parents, Margaret and Thomas Caldwell, owned a regional property management company. Not flashy, not small either. A family business built slowly over decades, managing apartment complexes and small commercial buildings across 3 states. My older brother Ryan was officially in development. That was the polite way of saying he'd been trying and failing to run his own ventures for years. My younger sister Lauren handled marketing, social media, public image. She was good at being visible. I ran operations, contracts, compliance, tenant disputes, vendor negotiations, emergency repairs at 2 a.m, the invisible parts that kept everything upright. I joined the company right after graduate school, not because I needed to, because my father asked. "You're steady," he'd said. "You see what others miss." I thought that meant something. At Thanksgiving, I learned what it really meant. After my mother's comment, my sister Lauren jumped in quickly. "Mom just means Emily's busy. She's got her own life." That was generous of her. Also untrue. I wasn't busy. I was available. Always. My brother Ryan laughed. "Yeah, Em's the responsible one. She'll land on her feet no matter what." There it was again. Because I was capable, I didn't need consideration. Because I didn't panic, I didn't need protection. I ate the rest of this meal quietly, observing, listening, watching how easily decisions were discussed once I was no longer considered relevant to them. They talked about restructuring the company, about future leadership, about simplifying inheritance. That word sat heavy in my chest. Inheritance. Later that evening, as I helped clear plates like I always did, my mother touched my arm. "Don't be sensitive," she said softly. "You know we trust you." Trust. Another word that had lost its meaning. "What exactly am I not being included in?" I asked. She hesitated. "Just a beat too long." "It's nothing finalized," she said. "We just think it's better if certain assets stay streamlined." Streamlined for who I asked. For the family, she replied. I was the family. At least I thought I was. I drove home that night with the radio off. The house felt quieter than usual when I walked in. I sat on the edge of my bed and replayed the sentence over and over. Emily doesn't really need to be included in that part. Not you don't deserve it, not you did something wrong. Just, you don't need. That's how exclusion happens in families like mine. Not with cruelty, with confidence. The next week, small things started shifting. Emails stopped copying me. Meetings were rescheduled without notice. Decisions I'd always handled came back to me already made. When I asked about it, my father smiled. We're just redistributing responsibilities. Redistributing away from me. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I watched. At night, I began to feel something unfamiliar. Not sadness, not anger, A kind of alertness, the feeling you get right before you realize the ground beneath you isn't as solid as you thought. 2 weeks later, I found out my name had been removed from the preliminary draft of my parents' will. I didn't go looking for it. I found it by accident while delivering revised lease agreements to my father's office. The folder was open, the heading clear. Estate planning summary, Ryan, Lauren, charitable trust, company assets. My name appeared once, under employee considerations. That was the moment the story I'd been telling myself collapsed. I wasn't being overlooked. I was being managed, quietly, carefully, by people who said they loved me. I closed the folder exactly the way I found it. I finished my work. I went home, and for the first time in my life, I didn't try to make sense of it in a way that protected them. I let it be what it was, a betrayal dressed up as practicality. I didn't know yet what I was going to do, but I knew one thing with absolute clarity. They had mistaken my silence for consent, and they were about to learn the difference. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. That's the problem with quiet betrayals. They don't explode. They settle. They rearrange your understanding of every memory that came before. After Thanksgiving, I stopped filling the gaps. Not dramatically, not as a statement. I simply stopped doing the invisible work that had never been acknowledged as work in the first place. I didn't remind Ryan about deadlines. I didn't quietly fix Lauren's errors before they reached clients. I didn't stay late to catch issues that weren't technically assigned to me anymore. I stayed exactly within the role they had begun carving out for me. The effect was immediate. 3 days later, a vendor called my personal phone in a panic because no one had approved an emergency plumbing repair. That had always been my responsibility. "I'm no longer the point person," I said calmly. "You'll need to contact the main office." There was a pause on the line. "Oh," he said. "Okay, I'll try Ryan." I hung up and felt something tighten in my chest. Not guilt, recognition. At work, my father began stopping by my office more often. "Everything okay?" he asked, one morning, leaning against the doorframe. "Yes," I replied. "Why? You seem quieter." I almost laughed. "I'm working," I said. He nodded unconvinced, then left. That afternoon, Lauren sent me a text. "Did you see the email about the Elmwood property?" "Yes." "Why didn't you respond?" "Because it wasn't addressed to me." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "We assumed you'd jump in anyway." That sentence sat between us like a confession. I didn't reply. At home, I started sleeping poorly. Not because I was anxious, but because my mind was busy rewriting the past. All those moments, I'd been praised for being easy. All the times my birthday was forgotten because you understand. All the promotions that went to Ryan because he needs confidence. I'd thought being low maintenance made me valuable. It had made me optional. The next escalation came quietly, the way everything in my family did. A revised org chart was sent out on a Monday morning. Ryan had been named Director of Operations. I stared at the screen for a long time. I had been running operations for 8 years. Lauren walked past my desk 10 minutes later, avoiding eye contact. I stood and followed her into the hallway. "When was this decided?" I asked. She stopped, turned slowly. Mom and Dad thought it made sense. "For who?" I asked again. "For Ryan," she said honestly. "He needs a win." "And I don't," I asked. She hesitated. "You don't need validation to function." There it was, the belief that had shaped my entire role in the family. Because I didn't fall apart, I didn't matter. I nodded. "Okay." She looked startled. "That's it." "That's it," I said. That evening, my parents called a family dinner. No holiday, no occasion, just dinner. I knew what that meant. Control disguised as connection. We sat around the same table where everything had started. My mother served food. My father cleared his throat. "We want to talk about the future," he said. Ryan sat a little straighter. Lauren folded her hands. I waited. "Given recent changes," my father continued, "we think it's best if your role becomes more specialized." Specialized. Another soft word. Focused on internal support, my mother added. You're so good behind the scenes. I looked at them, really looked, not as parents, as decision makers. And ownership, I asked. Silence. Ryan shifted in his chair. Lauren stared at her plate. My mother smiled tightly. That's complicated. It isn't, I said. It's just uncomfortable. My father sighed. Emily, this isn't about punishing you. No, I replied. It's about controlling me. He bristled. That's unfair. Is it? I asked. You're removing my authority, my access, and my future stake, while keeping my labor. Silence again. Longer this time. My mother reached for my hand. You're reading too much into this. I pulled my hand back gently. No, I'm finally reading it correctly. That night, I went home and opened a box I'd inherited years earlier from my grandmother, Ruth Caldwell. At the time, it had felt symbolic. Old photos, letters, deeds. I hadn't understood why she'd insisted I keep it. Now, as I read through her notes, something chilling emerged. She'd built half the early portfolio with my grandfather, managed tenants, negotiated contracts, and then quietly, she'd been written out too. Her final note was brief. They will call it family harmony. It is control. I sat there for a long time. The next morning, I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer, not to threaten, not to fight, to understand. Her name was Diane Mercer. Early 60s, sharp eyes, no patience for sentimentality. She listened, asked questions, took notes. When I finished, she nodded. They're narrowing your options while relying on your compliance, she said. That's not illegal, but it's strategic. What are my options? I asked. She smiled slightly. More than they think. I left her office feeling something new. Not hope, clarity. Back at work, the pressure increased. Ryan struggled visibly. Deadlines slipped. Vendors complained. He came to my desk twice in 1 week, asking how I used to handle certain issues. I showed him once. The second time, I said, "That's above my current scope." He stared at me. "Are you serious?" "Yes. You're really gonna let this fail?" I met his eyes. "I'm letting it be what it is." That night, my mother called. "You're creating tension," she said. "No," I replied. "I'm refusing to absorb it." She didn't like that answer. Neither did my father. But something had already shifted. They could feel it. The quiet compliance they depended on was gone. And without it, the structure they'd built on my silence was starting to crack. I didn't know yet how far it would go. But I knew one thing. This was no longer about inclusion. It was about survival. And I had already started choosing myself. The tension didn't explode. It compressed. That was the most unsettling part. At work, everything looked normal on the surface. Emails went out. Meetings happened. Rent checks cleared. But underneath the system, I had quietly held together for years, was starting to wobble. Not because I sabotaged anything, because I stopped compensating. Ryan's new title didn't come with new competence. He held meetings where he repeated my old recommendations as if they were revelations. But when it came time to execute, he hesitated, deferred, asked Lauren, asked my father, asked me. The first time he did, I answered professionally, briefly, without volunteering more than asked. The second time, I noticed something shift in his tone. Irritation, entitlement. "You know how this works," he said, standing in my doorway. "Why are you acting like this?" Like what I asked. Detached. I almost smiled. "I'm aligned with my role," I said. "You wanted me behind the scenes." He stared at me for a moment, then scoffed. "Unbelievable." He walked away, shaking his head, muttering something about loyalty. That word again. At home, my phone buzzed constantly. Lauren texting questions she used to know the answers to. My mother checking in under the guise of concern. "You okay? You seem distant. We're worried about you." Not once did they ask if their decisions had hurt me. They asked if my reaction inconvenienced them. One evening, my father invited me to his office after hours. The building was quiet, lights dimmed. The kind of setting meant to encourage vulnerability. He closed the door and leaned back in his chair. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," he said. "I'm not making anything," I replied. "I'm responding to what he asked, frustration seeping through, to being excluded from decisions about my own future." He sighed. "Emily, you've always been part of this family. That's not the same as being part of the plan," I said. He looked at me closely then. "What do you want?" I considered the question. Not what I wanted from him, what I wanted for myself. "I want transparency," I said. "I want my authority to match my responsibility. Or, I want out." He frowned. "Out." "Yes." He laughed softly, as if humoring a child. "You wouldn't leave. This place needs you." That was the moment I knew. They didn't think I had leverage. They thought I had loyalty. I stood. "I'll let you know my decision." He nodded, confident. "Take your time." I already had. That night, I met with Diane again. I brought documents this time. Emails, org charts, the revised role descriptions, notes from meetings where decisions had been made without me. She reviewed everything carefully. "They're creating a paper trail that minimizes your claim to future ownership," she said. "If you stay, it strengthens their position. And if I leave," I asked. "It destabilizes them," she said calmly. "But it protects you." I felt my chest tighten. "I don't want to destroy them." "You don't have to," she replied. "You just have to stop protecting them from the consequences of their choices." The next escalation came from an unexpected place. My grandmother's old property. A small apartment building she'd insisted be kept separate from the main portfolio. It had been managed quietly for years, technically under a trust. Lauren mentioned it casually at lunch one day. "Mom's thinking of folding the Oak Ridge building into the main company assets," she said. For simplicity, Oak Ridge was the one property my grandmother had left ambiguous notes about. The one she'd warned me about. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "That trust has conditions," I said. Lauren shrugged. "Mom says it's outdated." That night, I pulled the documents from the box again. And there it was. A clause my parents had either forgotten or ignored. If the Oak Ridge property was ever absorbed into the main company without unanimous consent of the trustees, ownership would revert to me. I sat there, heart pounding. Not triumph, understanding. This wasn't about money. It was about power they didn't realize they no longer fully controlled. The following week, my mother invited me to lunch. Just the two of us. She smiled warmly, ordered my favorite soup, tried to recreate normalcy. "You know we love you," she said, halfway through the meal. "I know," I replied. "Then why are you pulling away?" I met her gaze. "Because love shouldn't require me to shrink." She frowned. "No one's asking you to shrink." "You are," I said quietly. "You just don't call it that." She reached across the table. I didn't take her hand. "We did what we thought was best," she said. "For who?" I asked. She didn't answer. That afternoon, I drafted a letter. Not a resignation. A notice. I requested formal clarification of my role, authority, and future stake. In writing. By a specific date. I sent it to my parents and copied the company attorney. The response was swift. A meeting was scheduled. Mandatory. As I closed my laptop, I felt something I hadn't felt since this all began. Not fear, anticipation, because I knew what they would try to do next. And I knew finally that I didn't have to stop them. I just had to step aside and let the truth surface on its own. The meeting invitation came with no agenda, just a time, a place, and an expectation. Conference room B. Monday, 9:00 a.m. That alone told me everything. When people want control, they avoid specifics. Vagueness keeps the power on their side. I arrived early, not to prepare, to observe. My parents were already there when I walked in. My mother sat stiffly, hands folded. My father stood near the window, arms crossed. The company attorney, Paul Whitman, sat at the far end of the table, flipping through a thin folder. Ryan and Lauren were not invited. That wasn't accidental. This wasn't about operations. It was about containment. "Emily, my father said, forcing a smile. Thanks for coming. I took a seat. You asked for clarification. I did too. Paul cleared his throat. We received your request. The company felt it was appropriate to discuss alignment. Alignment. Another word that meant compliance. My mother leaned forward. We're concerned, she said. You seem unhappy. I'm concerned too, I replied. I seem excluded. My father sighed. You're reading hostility where there isn't any. No, I said calmly. I'm reading patterns. Paul slid a document across the table. This outlines your revised position. I scanned it. Reduced authority. Narrowed scope. No mention of ownership. A reinforced non-compete clause. Language about loyalty and confidentiality that bordered on threatening. I looked up. This isn't clarification. This is restriction. It's protection, my mother said quickly. For everyone, for who I asked. My father's jaw tightened. We built this company. We decide how it's structured. Yes, I said, and I decide whether I participate. Paul interjected. If you choose not to, there are consequences. I nodded. I assumed there would be. The room went quiet. My father looked genuinely surprised. You're serious? Yes. My mother's voice softened. Emily, don't do this out of pride. I'm doing it out of self-respect, I said. Paul leaned back. Then we need to discuss exit terms. I felt something steady settle in my chest. This was the moment. Not a confrontation, a pivot. Before that, I said, I want to address the Oak Ridge property. The effect was immediate. My mother's face changed. Just slightly. My father turned from the window. What about it? He asked. I understand there's discussion about folding it into the main portfolio, I said. My mother recovered quickly. It's inefficient to manage separately. According to the trust documents, I said it can't be absorbed without unanimous consent. Paul froze. What trust documents? He asked. I slid a copy across the table. The clause highlighted. Silence stretched. Paul read carefully. Then again. This changes things, he said slowly. My father stared at the page. Why wasn't this disclosed? It was, I replied. Years ago. No one paid attention. My mother's voice shook. Emily, that building isn't about you. It is, I said, legally. Paul closed the folder. If the property is absorbed improperly, ownership reverts. To me, I said. No one spoke. This wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was leverage they didn't know I had. My father finally sat down. What do you want? The same question asked differently now. I want a clean separation, I said. No non-compete. Fair severance. And the Oak Ridge Trust honored. And if we refuse, my mother asked quietly, then I protect what's mine, I said. And I walk. Paul rubbed his temples. We'll need time to review. Take it, I said. You have 10 days. I stood. My father looked up at me. You've changed. I met his gaze. No. I stopped disappearing. I left the room without another word. That afternoon, the emails started. From Paul. From my mother. From Lauren, confused and frantic. What's happening? Mom says you're threatening the company. Why didn't you tell us about Oak Ridge? I didn't respond. Instead, I met with Diane. She read everything. Smiled once. They underestimated you, she said. Yes, I replied. They always did. Be prepared, she warned. They may try to pressure you emotionally. They already are, I said. It just doesn't work anymore. That night, my father called. Not as CEO, as a parent. We gave you everything, he said. Education, opportunity, stability. You gave me responsibility, I replied, and took my agency. That's not fair. It's accurate. He was quiet for a long moment. If you walk away, you lose your family. I closed my eyes briefly. No, I said. I lose a role that was killing me. I hung up. The next few days felt surreal. Ryan called once, angry, accusatory. Lauren called twice, confused, tearful. My mother sent long messages about sacrifice and unity and how families shouldn't involve lawyers. I didn't argue. I didn't defend. I waited. On the 9th day, Paul emailed. They agreed to my terms. Severance. Non-compete lifted. Oak Ridge Trust untouched. No apology. I didn't expect one. We scheduled the signing for Friday. As I printed the documents that morning, I felt something unexpected. Grief, not for what I was losing, for what I'd never had. A family that chose me without conditions. But grief didn't stop my hand from signing. When I wrote my name on that final page, something inside me unlocked. I wasn't leaving in anger. I was leaving with clarity. And as I walked out of that building for the last time, I knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the point of no return. Because now, the consequences would unfold without me holding them back. And for the first time, that wasn't my responsibility. The building looked smaller from the parking lot once I no longer belonged to it. Same brick facade, same glass doors, same company logo I'd defended for years in conversations that never included me. But the weight had shifted. I wasn't carrying it anymore. That realization didn't feel triumphant. It felt disorienting. The first week after I signed the separation agreement, my days felt strangely empty. No early morning calls, no late-night emergencies, no constant hum of responsibility vibrating under my skin. I woke up at 6 out of habit, then lay there, staring at the ceiling, waiting for urgency that never arrived. My phone stayed quiet. Too quiet. On Tuesday, my mother broke the silence. Her message wasn't long. "We should talk. This feels unfinished." I stared at it for a full minute before replying. "I'm not available for emotional processing. If you have a legal question, talk to Paul." I didn't recognize my own words. They were calm, direct, final. She didn't respond. That afternoon, I drove to Oak Ridge for the first time in years. The apartment building sat on a tree-lined street in New Haven, older than the rest of the portfolio. Red brick, worn steps. A place my grandmother had loved, because as she once told me, people live real lives here. I met with the property manager, a woman named Denise, who'd been there longer than anyone else. "I didn't know it was yours," she said carefully. "It wasn't," I replied. "Until it was." We walked the grounds together. She showed me deferred maintenance issues that had been postponed for budget reasons. Small things, fixable things, things I could now choose to address. That word again, choose. 2 days later, Ryan called. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "You blindsided us," he said. "I informed you," I replied. "You went behind our backs." "No," I said. "I went around you," he scoffed. "You always think you're smarter than everyone else." I didn't rise to it. "I think I'm done sacrificing clarity to keep things comfortable," I said. "You're tearing the family apart," he snapped. I closed my eyes briefly. No. I stopped holding it together by myself. He hung up. That night, Lauren showed up at my door. She looked exhausted. Mascara smudged. Jacket thrown on over a sweater like she hadn't planned to be anywhere. "I don't understand what you're doing," she said, as soon as I opened the door. "I'm taking responsibility for myself," I replied. She walked past me into the living room without asking, sat on the couch, pressed her palms together. "They're spiraling," she said. "Dad's angry. Mom's crying. Ryan's furious." I waited. "You could fix this," she added. There it was, the expectation. I sat across from her. "Fix what?" "Everything," she said. "This mess." "This isn't a mess," I replied. "It's the result." She stared at me, like I'd spoken another language. "You didn't even talk to us," she said. "I watched," I replied. "For years." She shook her head. "You're punishing us." I met her gaze. "I'm refusing to be punished anymore." She looked down at her hands. "They say you planned this." I didn't laugh. "I prepared," I said. "There's a difference." She was quiet for a long time. "Do you hate us?" she asked. The question surprised me. "No," I said honestly. "I just don't trust the structure we were inside." She stood. "I don't know how to be your sister outside of it." "That's something you'll have to learn," I said. "Just like I did." She left without hugging me. The next escalation didn't come from my family. It came from the company. Paul emailed to inform me that several senior vendors were requesting clarification on leadership changes. My name was still coming up in conversations. They were trying to pull me back in without pulling me back in. I forwarded the email to Diane. Her response was immediate. Do not engage. They are testing the boundary. I didn't reply to Paul. 2 weeks later, I received an offer. Not from my family, from a competitor, a regional real estate firm based in Providence. They'd heard I was no longer tied to Caldwell Properties. They wanted someone to overhaul their operations before a major acquisition. The salary was higher, the authority clear, the structure defined. I took the meeting, not because I was eager, because I finally could. At dinner that Sunday, my mother left a voicemail. We didn't raise you to walk away, she said. I listened to it once, then deleted it, because she was wrong. They raised me to survive. I just learned how to do it without disappearing. The following week, I accepted the offer. I didn't tell my family. They found out when the announcement went public. Ryan sent a message filled with anger and disbelief. Lauren sent a single word. Wow. My father sent nothing. The day I started my new job, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Nervous. Not the anxious kind. The alive kind. I walked into a building where no one knew my history, where I wasn't anyone's daughter or sister, just Emily Caldwell, and that was enough. That night, as I sat on my couch with the lights low, I realized something with quiet certainty. Walking away hadn't ended the conflict. It had shifted the balance, because now the consequences were unfolding without me buffering them. And for the first time in my life, that didn't feel like failure. It felt like justice beginning to take shape. The tables hadn't turned yet, but they were starting to wobble, and I wasn't holding them steady anymore. The first sign that things were unraveling came quietly, disguised as courtesy. 2 weeks into my new role in Providence, I received an email from Paul Whitman. No subject line, just a sentence. Several matters have come up that require historical clarification. We'd appreciate your cooperation. I stared at the screen for a long moment before forwarding it to Diane. Her reply was immediate. Do not respond. They are no longer entitled to your labor, your memory, or your emotional availability. I closed my laptop and went back to work. At my new company, Redwood Asset Group, people spoke plainly. When something broke, it was named. When something needed fixing, it was assigned. There was no mythology about family or loyalty, just responsibility. That difference felt almost disorienting. On my 3rd week, I attended a board review where someone openly questioned a decision I'd made. No whispering, no triangulation, just a direct challenge. I answered. They nodded. We moved on. I walked out of that meeting with my hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, from relief. Meanwhile, updates from my family's world arrived, whether I wanted them or not. A former colleague texted to ask if I'd heard about the missed refinancing deadline. A vendor I'd worked with for years called my personal number, confused about who had authority to sign. I gave the same answer every time. I'm no longer involved. Each time I said it, it felt more real. The next escalation came from my mother. She showed up at my apartment, unannounced, on a Saturday morning. I opened the door and knew immediately this wasn't about reconciliation. She looked determined, focused, controlled. Can we talk? She asked. I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't sit down. She paced. You've put us in an impossible position, she said. I didn't, I replied. I left one. She stopped pacing. The company is struggling. I nodded. That happens when systems depend on one person. She flinched. They're blaming us, she continued. The board, the lenders, people are asking questions. I waited. You know how to explain things, she said finally. You always did. There it was. Not an apology. A request to step back into the role. I'm not available, I said. Her voice rose slightly. You can't just abandon us. I didn't abandon you, I replied. I set a boundary. She stared at me. You sound cold. I met her gaze. I sound clear. She sat down heavily. You've always been the strong one. she said. Why are you doing this now? I took a breath. Because being strong was never supposed to mean being disposable, I said. She looked away. They're talking about selling, she said quietly. That caught my attention. The company, she nodded. At a loss. I felt something then. Not satisfaction. Not relief. Confirmation. The thing I'd known, but hadn't said aloud. Without me absorbing the pressure, the structure couldn't hold. I won't help with that, I said. I'm not asking you to fix it, she said quickly. Just guide us. I stood. No, I said. This ends here. She looked up at me, eyes bright with frustration. You think this is revenge? I considered the question carefully. No, I said. This is consequence. She left shortly after. No hug, no goodbye. At work, my responsibilities expanded quickly. Redwood was acquiring 2 new properties, and the transition planning fell to me. I noticed something interesting. I wasn't exhausted. I worked hard, yes. But the work ended. It didn't follow me home. No one expected me to be endlessly available. One evening, my boss, Mark Jensen, stopped by my office. You're effective, he said. But you don't overextend. I smiled faintly. I learned that the hard way. He nodded as if he understood more than I'd said. The next call came from Ryan. He sounded different. Less angry. More desperate. They're freezing accounts, he said. Lenders want updated projections. Dad doesn't know what to say.
아침이디. 알레디 시험이 삼 남 에는 데스 아인 domim
He added softer. We need you. I closed my eyes. No, I said. You need systems that don't depend on sacrifice. You're really going to let this fall apart? He asked. I answered honestly. I'm going to let it be what it is. He hung up. That night, Lauren sent me a long message. Apologetic, confused, afraid. I read it once. Then I replied with one sentence. I love you, but I won't go back into a structure that erases me. She didn't reply. The final escalation came unexpectedly. A letter arrived from the company's legal counsel. Not a threat, a request. They wanted me to sign an affidavit stating I'd voluntarily relinquished any claim to future ownership and responsibility. Diane laughed when she read it. They're trying to close the door behind you, she said, because they're afraid you'll come back through it later. I won't, I said. Then you don't need to sign anything, she replied. I declined. The sale talks became public a month later. Caldwell Properties was being shopped quietly enough that only insiders noticed at first. I noticed, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of what had shifted. Not power over them, freedom from them. The revenge wasn't in watching them struggle. It was in building something stable elsewhere, while the structure that relied on my silence finally faced reality. As winter approached, I felt something else settle in. Peace, not the absence of conflict, the absence of obligation. And I knew the next chapter wouldn't be about reaction. It would be about choice. But before that could fully take shape, there was one final thing my family would try to take from me. And this time, I wouldn't just step away. I would take something back. The thing they tried to take wasn't obvious at first. It didn't come wrapped in anger or accusation. It came disguised as paperwork. On a gray Monday morning in February, Diane forwarded me a scanned document with a single line highlighted in yellow. Assignment of beneficial interest. I recognized the formatting immediately. It was tied to the Oak Ridge Trust. They filed this on Friday, Diane said when I called her. Quietly. What does it do? I asked, though. Part of me already knew. It attempts to reassign contingent beneficiary rights, she replied. From you to the company. I felt my stomach tighten. They can't do that, I said. They can try, she answered. They're claiming you waived interest when you signed the separation agreement. I didn't, I said. I know, Diane replied. But they're betting you won't want another fight. That was the calculation. That I was tired. That I was settled. That I wouldn't want to reopen something that looked like family drama from the outside. They were wrong, not because I wanted revenge, but because this wasn't about the company anymore. It was about the last piece of my grandmother's voice still speaking on my behalf. I want to contest it, I said. Diane didn't hesitate. Good, because we can. The filing wasn't aggressive. It was surgical. A petition for declaratory judgment. Clear, narrow, focused entirely on the trust, language, and intent. No emotional framing. No accusations. Just facts. My parents were served 3 days later. My mother called that evening. Her voice was tight, controlled. Did you really have to do this? Yes, I said. We thought you were done, she said. I was, I replied. Until you tried to erase something that was never yours. Silence stretched between us. This is tearing the family apart, she said finally. No, I replied. This is revealing what held it together. She hung up. Ryan's reaction was louder. He left me a voicemail that night, his words tumbling over each other in frustration. You're unbelievable, he said. After everything, you're still trying to take more. I listened once, then deleted it. Lauren didn't call. She texted a single sentence. I don't recognize any of us anymore. I stared at it for a long time, then replied, neither do I. And that might be the point. The hearing was scheduled for late March. Not a trial, a procedural review. But it was enough. Enough to make the truth visible. Enough to force the conversation they'd avoided for years into a room where silence didn't count as agreement. At Redwood, I told no one what was happening. Not because I was ashamed, but because it wasn't part of the life I was building now. That mattered more. The week before the hearing, my father called. Not angry, not defensive, tired. You could have talked to us, he said. I did, I replied. For years. We didn't think it mattered that much, he said quietly. I closed my eyes. That's the problem, I said. You never thought my future mattered unless it served yours. He exhaled slowly. If we lose Oak Ridge, you won't lose it, I said. It will stay exactly where it belongs. With you, he said. Yes, I replied. He didn't argue. On the morning of the hearing, I sat in the courthouse hallway alone. No family beside me. No one to translate or soften or absorb. Just me. I didn't feel nervous. I felt steady. Inside the room, the judge asked a few questions, reviewed the documents, read my grandmother's handwritten notes aloud. The intent was unmistakable. The ruling was brief. The reassignment was invalid. The trust stood. The property remained mine. That was it. No drama, no speech, just confirmation. Outside, Diane smiled once. They thought you wouldn't push back. I didn't push, I said. I stood. My mother didn't speak to me for weeks after that. Ryan sent one more message, accusing me of betrayal. Lauren eventually called. I don't know how to fix this, she said. You don't have to, I replied. You just have to stop pretending it isn't real. Spring came early that year. I spent my weekends at Oak Ridge, meeting tenants, planning repairs, learning the rhythms of a place that had never asked me to disappear. It felt different owning something outright, not because of control, because of responsibility chosen freely. One afternoon, as I stood in the courtyard, watching kids play between buildings, I realized something quietly profound. This wasn't the revenge story people like to imagine. There were no cheers, no collapse, no dramatic apologies. There was just a line I had drawn and refused to let anyone step over again. And that line had changed everything. Because once you reclaim something that was meant for you, the power dynamic never resets. It ends. And in that ending, something new finally has room to begin. After the hearing, the noise faded. Not immediately, but steadily. The calls slowed. The messages stopped arriving in clusters. The urgency my family had once projected onto me began to lose its shape. now that I wasn't absorbing it. That silence told me more than any apology ever could. At Oak Ridge, I started small. I didn't announce changes. I didn't sweep in with authority. I walked the property, listened to tenants, reviewed maintenance logs that had been marked later for years. Later is a dangerous word. It's how neglect hides behind intention. Denise watched me carefully at first. She'd seen owners come and go, promises made, plans abandoned. "You're actually fixing things," she said one afternoon as we reviewed repair bids. "Yes," I replied. "That's the job." She smiled faintly. "Most people forget that." At Redwood, my work deepened. We closed the acquisition ahead of schedule. The board approved an expansion of my role. More responsibility, yes, but matched with resources and authority. No one called it a favor. They called it appropriate. That distinction mattered more than I expected. One evening, Mark asked me to stay after a meeting. "You don't flinch," he said, "even when things get uncomfortable." "I used to," I replied. "I just did it quietly." He nodded. "Whatever taught you that also sharpened you." He didn't ask for details. He didn't need them. At home, I started unpacking boxes I'd left sealed since college. Old notebooks, photos, a letter from my grandmother I hadn't noticed before, tucked into the back of a ledger. It was short, written in a firm, slanted hand. "If you're reading this, you chose yourself. That's the only inheritance that lasts." I folded it carefully and put it back. My family re-entered my life cautiously. Lauren was the first. She invited me for coffee one Sunday morning. Neutral territory. No expectations. She looked different, quieter. "I didn't realize how much you absorbed," she said after a while. "Everything I avoided. I listened. I thought if I stayed pleasant, things would work out," she continued. "But they don't. They just harden." "Yes," I said. "They do." She looked at me. "Are you happier?" I considered the question. "I'm more honest," I said, "with myself." She nodded. "That feels scarier." "It is," I replied. At first, she didn't ask me to fix anything. That was new. Ryan never reached out again. I wasn't surprised. Some people mistake access for entitlement. When you remove the access, the relationship collapses under its own assumptions. My parents tried once more. A letter this time. Handwritten, careful, asking for a meeting to reset. I read it slowly, then I declined. Not angrily, not defensively. Simply, I'm not available for that conversation. And I wasn't. The summer unfolded quietly. Oak Ridge stabilized. Tenants stayed. Repairs got done. The place breathed again. At Redwood, my team grew. I hired people who asked questions and documented answers, who didn't rely on heroics. One afternoon, a junior analyst asked if I wanted to be the sole approver on a new process. "No," I said. "Build redundancy." She looked surprised. "Doesn't that dilute control?" "No," I replied. "It protects people." That sentence felt like a full circle. In July, my mother sent a birthday card. No guilt, no subtext. "Just hope you're well." I was. I didn't reply immediately. Then I sent a short note back. "Thank you. I hope you are too." Nothing more, nothing less. The last shift came unexpectedly. A reporter reached out. Someone had noticed the Oak Ridge Trust case. Quietly, in passing. She wanted to talk about family businesses and invisible labor. I declined the interview. Not because I was hiding. Because I didn't need to be seen that way anymore. The story had already done its work. One evening, as I locked up Oak Ridge, after a late walkthrough, I stood on the front steps and watched the sun dip behind the buildings. I felt something settle into place. Not victory. Alignment. I had taken back something that had always been mine. Not just property. Choice. And once you have that, the rest rearranges itself. The tables don't turn with a crash. They stop needing to be turned at all, because you've already stepped away from the game. By September, the story everyone else told about my family no longer included me. That was how I knew the separation had fully taken hold. The company sale went through quietly. Not the dramatic collapse people imagine when they hear the word betrayal, but a slow, negotiated exit. The price was lower than my parents had hoped, higher than I'd expected. A compromise shaped by urgency. I heard about it secondhand, through a former colleague who still texted me occasionally. They kept asking if I'd known this would happen. I never answered that question directly. At Redwood, I was preparing a transition plan for a portfolio twice the size of anything I'd ever managed before. The work was complex, but it was clean. When decisions were made, they were recorded. When risks appeared, they were addressed. No one assumed I would catch what others missed by sacrificing myself. That alone felt revolutionary. One afternoon, while reviewing a draft operating agreement, I noticed a clause that centralized authority too tightly. It reminded me of something I couldn't quite place at first. Then it clicked. It was the same kind of language my parents had used, the kind that sounded efficient, but quietly removed agency. I flagged it, suggested revisions, explained why redundancy mattered. The board listened. They approved the changes without debate. I sat back in my chair afterward, hands resting flat on the desk, and felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Not because they agreed with me, because they treated my input as something to consider, not manage. At home, my life simplified. I stopped hosting holidays, stopped organizing, stopped anticipating needs that weren't voiced. Friends noticed. "You seem lighter," one of them said over dinner. "I stopped negotiating my presence," I replied. They nodded, not fully understanding, but sensing the truth in it. The one conversation I hadn't expected came in October. A call from my father. I almost didn't answer, but something told me this was different. "I won't take much of your time," he said. I waited. "We sold the company," he continued. "Your mother and I are moving." Where, I asked. "Smaller place? Out of state." I nodded. "I hope it's a good change." There was a pause. Then, "You were right." I didn't respond immediately. Not because I was savoring it, because I needed to be sure I heard him correctly. "We relied on you," he said. "Too much. And we didn't see what it cost you." I felt the old reflex rise, the urge to soften it, to reassure him. I let it pass. "Yes," I said. "I don't expect forgiveness," he added quickly. "I just wanted you to know." "Thank you for saying it," I replied. "That's enough." We hung up without ceremony. I didn't cry afterward. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt complete. A few weeks later, Lauren invited me to Thanksgiving. Just the two of us. No parents, no Ryan. We cooked together in her small apartment, awkward at first, then easier. "I keep thinking about how often I stayed quiet," she said, "while chopping onions. How much I let slide." "So do I replied. She looked at me. "What would you do differently?" I considered the question. "I would notice sooner," I said, "and I wouldn't wait for permission to stop." She nodded slowly. "I think I'm learning that now." We ate quietly, shared a pie from the bakery down the street. No speeches, no declarations, just two sisters finally meeting each other without roles attached. As winter approached, Oak Ridge thrived. Tenants stayed longer. Maintenance requests dropped. People treated the place like home because it was being treated like one. Denise stopped by my office one afternoon with a stack of applications. "People want to live here," she said, surprised. I smiled. People notice when they're respected. One night, as I locked the office and stepped out into the cold, I realized something with startling clarity. The revenge wasn't that my family lost control. It was that I stopped needing it. I no longer measured myself against their approval or disappointment. Their silence no longer felt like punishment. It felt like space, the kind of space where something new could exist. And in that space, I wasn't defined by what I endured. I was defined by what I chose. That realization changed the texture of everything. The way I spoke, the way I listened, the way I stayed, or didn't. As the year closed, I knew one thing with certainty. The final chapter wouldn't be about what I took from them. It would be about what I finally allowed myself to keep. And that, more than anything, felt like the real turning of the tables. The thing about stability is that it reveals what was never stable to begin with. By the time winter settled in, my life had a rhythm that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. Workdays ended when they were supposed to. Weekends belonged to me. Oak Ridge ran smoothly without constant intervention. Redwood trusted me to lead without hovering. Nothing was dramatic. And that was exactly the point. The call that disrupted that calm came on a Wednesday evening in early December. It was from an unfamiliar number. Emily, a man said when I answered, "This is Harold Keene. I'm the executor for your parents' estate planning." I stayed quiet. "We need to discuss an amendment," he continued. "Your parents are revisiting their will." There it was. Inheritance. Again. "I'm not available for family negotiations," I said evenly. "This isn't a negotiation," he replied. "It's disclosure." I listened. "They intend to equalize distributions," he said carefully, "including Oak Ridge." My jaw tightened. "Oak Ridge isn't part of their estate," I said. "I'm aware," he replied. "They're requesting your consent to include it." "No," I said. Silence on the line. "I understand this is sensitive," he said. "It's settled," I replied. "Please note my refusal." He hesitated. "They believe this would restore balance." Balance. Another word used to justify taking from me. "It would restore their comfort," I said. "Not balance." The call ended politely. I sat on my couch afterward, hands folded, breathing slowly. The old familiar feeling tried to surface. The pressure to compromise, to smooth. I let it pass. The next move came predictably. My mother emailed, long, emotional, framed as concern, as unity, as legacy. She wrote about Christmas traditions, about family homes, about how hard it was to accept things had changed. She didn't mention the will. She didn't need to. I replied with 3 sentences. "I'm not revisiting decisions already made. I wish you well. Please respect my boundary." She didn't respond. At Redwood, I was promoted quietly. Expanded oversight. A new title that didn't need announcing. During a leadership offsite, someone asked how I handled conflict so calmly. "I don't confuse discomfort with danger," I said. They nodded thoughtful. That night, I received a message from Lauren. "They're really upset." I read it once, then replied, "I'm not responsible for regulating their emotions." A pause. "I never realized how often you were doing that for all of us," she wrote. "Neither did I replied, until I stopped. Christmas came quietly. No invitations, no guilt-laced messages. I spent it at Oak Ridge, helping Denise organize a small tenant gathering. Cookies, coffee, kids laughing in the courtyard. It felt real. On Christmas night, my father called. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. "It wasn't supposed to end like this," he said. I deleted it. Not because I was angry, because it was already over. In January, the final push came. A formal letter from the estate attorney, carefully worded, requesting mediation. Diane reviewed it and smiled thinly. "They're trying one last time," she said. "I'm done," I replied. "Then we decline," she said. "And we document." We did. The response was brief, final. No further contact was initiated after that. The silence that followed wasn't hostile. It was resigned. And in that resignation, something unexpected happened. I felt compassion, not the kind that pulls you back into harm, the kind that understands without re-entering. They had built a system that relied on my self-erasure. When I stopped disappearing, the system collapsed under its own weight. That wasn't revenge. That was physics. One evening, as I walked through Oak Ridge, after a light snowfall, Denise caught up to me. "You know," she said, "this place feels different." I looked around it. Lights glowing in windows. People living. "Yes," I said. "It does." She hesitated. "Why did you fight so hard for it?" I thought about my grandmother, about silence, about being easy. "Because it was the one thing that wasn't built on me giving myself away," I said. She nodded, understanding more than I expected. As January closed, I realized the last thing tying me emotionally to my family had loosened. Not because they changed, because I did. The final chapter wasn't going to be about reconciliation or distance. It was going to be about something quieter, acceptance, not of what they did, but of what I would never do again. And that more than anything they could take or offer was the real inheritance I'd claimed. By February, the past had stopped knocking. That was how I noticed it was finally over. No new emails from attorneys. No messages framed as concern. No invitations disguised as opportunities to talk things through. The silence wasn't dramatic. It wasn't hostile. It was settled. At Redwood, I led a quarterly review that would have terrified an earlier version of me. Complex numbers, hard questions, no softening language. When someone challenged a projection, I answered directly. When a risk surfaced, I named it without cushioning. After the meeting, Mark pulled me aside. "You don't over-explain," he said. "It makes people trust you." I thought about how often I used to explain myself to exhaustion. I used to, I replied. It didn't help. Oak Ridge continued to thrive. We refinanced at a favorable rate. I approved a long-term maintenance plan that would have been considered too cautious at my parents' company. Here it was considered responsible. One afternoon, Denise had brought me a tenant application from a woman who'd been turned away elsewhere. "She's rebuilding," Denise said. "Rough divorce, 2 kids." I reviewed the file carefully. "Let's give her a chance," I said. "With safeguards." Denise smiled. "Your grandmother would have liked that." That stayed with me. The only family member I still heard from, occasionally, was Lauren. She called one evening, voice low. "I'm in therapy," she said. "That's good," I replied. "I'm realizing how much of my life was about staying likable," she continued. "About not rocking things." I listened. "I thought you were just difficult," she said quietly. "But you weren't. You were honest." I didn't correct her. "I don't expect us to be close," she added. "I just didn't want silence to be the only thing left." "We don't need silence," I said. "We just need reality." She accepted that. Always.
Be. Beware
My father sent one final email. No subject, no justification, just a sentence. "You deserved better from us." I read it once. I didn't reply. Not because I was withholding forgiveness, because the sentence stood on its own. For the first time, it wasn't asking me to carry anything. As spring approached, I noticed something subtle but profound. I stopped telling my story in my head as a wound. It became a reference point instead, a reminder of where my boundaries came from, why they mattered. At a leadership workshop, someone asked participants to name the moment they learned to choose themselves. I hesitated. Then I said it plainly. When I realized love that requires silence isn't love, it's control. No one argued. That night, walking home, I felt a quiet gratitude for the version of me who had finally stopped asking for permission. She hadn't been loud. She hadn't been cruel. She hadn't tried to win. She had simply stepped out of the role that was harming her. The hardest truth I learned wasn't about betrayal. It was about how long I'd been cooperating with it, because it felt familiar. I don't blame myself for that. I honor the moment I stopped. Because once you stop participating in your own erasure, everything else reorganizes. Relationships, work, silence, even memory. The final chapter wasn't about closure in the traditional sense. It was about something sturdier, a life that didn't require me to disappear to function. And that more than reconciliation or revenge was the ending I needed. The last shift didn't arrive with news. It arrived on an ordinary morning when I realized I wasn't bracing for anything. No phone check reflex, no low-grade anxiety humming under my thoughts, no mental rehearsal of conversations that might never happen. I stood, my kitchen with coffee cooling in my hand, and understood, with a kind of quiet certainty, that my nervous system had finally stood down. That was the real ending. At work, Redwood approved the long-term plan I'd been building toward for months. Shared authority, documented decision paths, clear succession. I insisted on those elements, not because I was afraid of being replaced, but because I knew what happens when systems depend on one person's endurance. When the board thanked me for protecting the institution, I corrected them. I'm protecting the people, I said. Institutions survive when people don't burn out. No one argued. Oak Ridge marked its first full year under my ownership with something small and meaningful. 0 emergency calls after midnight. The kind of metric no one celebrates publicly, but every tenant feels. Denise brought me a plant for my office. A simple thing. Green, steady. For sticking around, she said. I'm not sticking around, I replied. I chose this. She smiled like she understood the difference. My family existed now as a separate orbit. We exchanged occasional updates. Neutral, brief, honest. There were no more attempts to renegotiate the past or rewrite intent. The will remained unchanged. Oak Ridge remained mine. The company was gone. The old structure dissolved. What surprised me most was how little satisfaction I felt about that. Not emptiness, freedom. I stopped imagining alternative endings. The apology that might have come sooner. The meeting where they might have listened. The version of events where I stayed and everything worked out. Those stories faded on their own once I stopped feeding them. One evening, Lauren and I met for dinner again. This time, it felt easier, less careful. I think I understand now, she said, why you didn't fight louder. I waited. You weren't trying to win, she continued. You were trying to leave intact. Yes, I said. She nodded. I'm learning how to do that too. We didn't promise closeness. We didn't define the relationship. We let it be what it was. At home, I reorganized a closet that had been cluttered for years. Old files, old notes, things I'd kept because I thought they might be useful someday. I recycled most of it. I kept my grandmother's letter. I kept one notebook from the early days, filled with checklists and margins, where I'd written reminders to myself, like, don't forget to follow up and make sure everyone's okay. I smiled at that version of me. She did what she knew how to do. She just stayed too long. The final realization came not from conflict, but from calm. I understood that revenge, as I'd once imagined it would have required me to stay emotionally tethered to people who couldn't meet me where I stood. Instead, the truest payback had been this. I stopped negotiating my worth. I stopped explaining my boundaries. I stopped absorbing discomfort to keep other people comfortable. I didn't need them to fail to prove I was right. I needed to succeed without disappearing. That's what turned the tables. Not a confrontation, not a lawsuit, not a dramatic rejection, a signature, a refusal, a choice repeated until it became a life. If you're listening to this and something in it feels uncomfortably familiar, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't owe loyalty to systems that erase you. You don't need permission to leave what harms you. And silence is not kindness when it costs you your agency. Choosing yourself doesn't make you cold. It makes you free. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like, comment, or subscribe. Share it with someone who's carrying more than they should. Someone who's been called strong when what they really needed was support. Your story matters, and you're allowed to stop explaining why you chose yourself.